Hi, I'm John Montgomery, and welcome to syn101. I'm John Montgomery, serving as the voice of Victor Wolonsky as always. Hope you're enjoying the classes so far. Today we're going to take a look at two shots. The first one is going to be looking at image stabilization. It's based on 3D tracking techniques, and it's a really cool feature of the new software. I mean, there's some stuff that Victor has tracked that has been nightmarish to track, and syn101 has done a fantastic job of doing it and a really easy solution in getting something that is workable for us. So let's go ahead and open up a sequence. First one that we're going to take a look at. It's a woman on green screen, so we'll go ahead and open it up. And if we take a look at it, it's 222 frames. But if you take a look at it, the shot actually is interlaced footage. So one of the things that you want to do when you're importing the footage is check out your interlacing. And we'll go ahead and do starting even. So it's starting on the even field. And you can see that took the frame rate up to 48 frames per second and changed the frame rate at the end as well to effectively be double what it does. Now, as you know, interlaced footage isn't always a great thing to work with. In fact, it's hardly ever a great thing to work with. But it's a fact of life that you're going to have interlaced footage come across your desk and so forth. And the other thing we're going to do here is do no resampling, because we don't want to resample the image at all. And then finally, one interesting thing about the sequence, you look at there's some built-in presets that syn101 recognizes. It's 1440 by 1080. But it actually recognized the aspect ratio correctly and is compensating for us in the display. So it does a nice job of compensating for that automatically. And we'll go ahead and import this. As you can see, the sequence is much longer than the original image sequence length because of the interlacing. And if you take a look at it, it's going to be a little jumpy here as we're looking at it in the class recording, because we're recording this at 12 frames per second. But believe this, it's shaking, and once you load it in, you'll see for yourself. You can see it's just kind of all over the place as it spins around, and especially in the end as the hero gets kind of close to us, it kind of jerks around a bit. And then there's also some weird stuff when you're working with image stabilization. As the phone kind of crosses in front of our talent's face, it becomes kind of really confused and throws off a lot of algorithms and other programs that Victor has tried to use in doing this. And you'll see that syn101 does kind of a nice job of dealing with it. And it doesn't nail it right off the bat, but again, have some ways to work around it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and get some trackers from it. So we're going to go ahead and just go ahead and click on auto tracker here. You don't need to run the auto solving of it at all. That's really not needed. So go ahead and run this through. And again, this is fairly decent sized footage, and it comes through pretty quickly. I've noticed that my MacBook Pro is a little bit slower than Victor's system that he's working on, but working on an 8-core, it certainly is a screaming speedy. Okay, so now here's our track that we have set up. You can see that we're looking pretty good. You've got a bunch of tracking points on her, some on the background, and in this case we do want them on her body because that's actually going to help us in our stabilization in this case, unlike in the previous scene that we've looked at as well, that we want to try and obviously get away from that as much as possible. So we'll go ahead and hit P, and we'll get in the stabilized tab. What we want to do is we'll go ahead, if you want to get the tracks. I believe maybe the first time that happens automatically for you to begin with, but if you've modified it, you might want to do that again. Now you can see that we have the tracks here, and there's been no adjustment to the image at all when you first do this. Then what we're going to do is we want to stabilize. Do we want to stabilize translation or XY positioning or UV positioning, as well as rotation? So we'll go ahead and select filter. And now you can start to see here in our preview window how the stabilization is being applied. Now the cut frequency determines the threshold of what is acceptable as part of a move versus what isn't acceptable in a move. So you don't want to always remove all stabilization in the scene. In this case, that would probably be hard to do. You want to maybe leave a little bit of a camera. So what's happening is anything over the frequency that we have here, anything over 4 in the frequency is going to be stabilized. So go ahead and click OK in the big dialog box. And what happens here in the smaller ones is we'll see, okay, and now we'll clear the cache, and you'll see our repositioned footage, and you'll be able to see it playing stabilized. And you can see that in the window down here at the bottom. You can see kind of the black edges that are being introduced in the imagery that's stabilizing it. And you can see it does actually really quite a nice job right off the bat. Now, there's a little bit right here. You can see how it, right on the end, you can see that one kind of couple frame jump there where there's a major move. And there really wasn't that major move in the camera. But what's happening is it's in part because the trackers that are happening in the background scene, so caused a little bit by the background scene. So go ahead and delete those, and we'll go ahead and say get the tracks now. And again, we were wanting to focus on her and not so much the background. And now you can see it's actually working a little bit better in the scene. We'll go ahead and lower the frequency a little bit, so we'll get a little bit more stabilization for us in the scene. And you can actually see this dynamically update as you're adjusting it. You can see that this part of the scene wasn't really adjusted very dramatically before, but now when you bring the cut frequency down, it is. So they'll go ahead and clear the cache again, and go ahead and do a quick render on it and get those frames here. And there you can see, let's go ahead and play it. And you can see now how it's concentrating on her in the middle of the scene. So stabilization is quite dramatic here. It's having much more of an impact of what we had there in the last time that we did it. But again, she's being a lot more smoother. And maybe in this case, you're obviously with the green screen, you're going to be keying around her. And the phone has a really nice movement here as we come right near here at the end. But the fact is here, while we've got a stabilized image, it's probably moving too much. We're losing too much of the image at certain points in time. So what we're able to do is we can adjust a little bit of motion compensation for this by adjusting the center of the scene. And we're going to go ahead and do that by hitting the P button to bring up the image prep window. And then you can see this little little center mark here in the middle. As you hover over it, you can see that you're actually moving it in the scene. So what you're doing is effectively applying a move on top of that. And we'll go ahead and make sure we add the key there and leave that on so that we're setting keyframes. And you're just adding another layer of movement on top of it. So you're adding an axis or transform on top of the stabilization of this axis effectively and what you're doing. So what we're going to do is just kind of go through here. And this is maybe isn't going to be the most ideal situation of things that you're going to want to do. But basically go through here and set some keyframes on various scenes to see how much of an adjustment we want to make. So here we're going to go ahead and probably just shift it back. Again, the idea is to compensate for the footage that's being moved. We're going to keep the overall stabilization, but now and try and counter that by making minor adjustments to the overall image. Just scroll through here, find some other frames that have some maximum points, and here we'll shift this to the left and down a little bit. And again, this may not work for you when you do it the first time. This may actually, reintroduce too much motion and so forth. But the idea of what we're doing here is kind of show you using this secondary adjustment that you can do in order to put a little, less drastic stabilization. It's really a common technique, actually, is to kind of remove the stabilization, then maybe add a little bit of it back in just to add a little bit of life to it. We'll go ahead and click OK. And now we'll kind of do a quick render of that we can preview here. And you can see now that there's a little less movement, but we're keeping some overall stabilization. And you're going to probably want to render this out and take a look at it in real time to ensure that you've done the right thing. The movement you added might look a little strange on top of it. But you can also take a look and adjust it in your graph editor as well. So if we look at the stabilizer in, we'll go ahead and you can turn off, we'll go ahead and turn off the change, but if you look at delta U and V are actually the X and Y position I was calling earlier. So you can take a look at that and see your graph of the keyframes that you had set in earlier, and so you can adjust them and modify them as you wish. If we go ahead and slide the time back and put the cursor back here near this keyframe, you can see what's happening here. And then drag back right near this keyframe. And let's go ahead and grab that keyframe. Go right to the left, there we go, and drag it. And now you can see that you can interactively move it. You move it further and back to the left. Next time you play it, it's going to go ahead and have the adjustment that's been added into it. So you've got that, and if you want to save your stabilized scene, you go ahead and click the Output tab, and you can resample the image to a new size if you wish, or you can go ahead and save your sequence and go ahead and enter a name and the format that you want. And the key is you want to enter a name and a zeros for your file number sequences, and it will create the correct numbering sequence for you already. If you don't do that, it will actually prompt you for it. And then you can go ahead and use that new stabilized scene in your compositing software as opposed to doing the stabilization in that application. So now let's take a look at our next shot here. It's another helicopter shot, a little bit different than the one that we've looked at in the past. And it's going to give us a good opportunity to take a look at several new concepts and also improve on some things that we've done in the past. So go ahead and load this in. And you can see that it's got no interlacing. Actually, if you take a look at the footage, our frame rate will be 24. So let's go ahead and do the default import settings that we've done in the past and go ahead and load the footage in. And then let's take a look at it, and we'll go ahead and see what kind of issues we have, and you'll see right away what kind of potential issues we might have in the shot. You can see we've got this helicopter move and then this tilt down and a weird kind of lock into move here that's going on, some interesting motion. But we're going to be able to nail this really effectively, so we'll go ahead and hit auto here. Go through, get the trackers, and then do the solve. And once the solve is done, you'll see immediately what kind of problems we have in working with this shot. And, you know, it's stuff that's actually, you know, not uncommon when you're trying to do tracks and so forth. And you can see, check this out. This is our camera move. And you can look at it, you know, that motion is not at all what's really happening, not at all what the camera is doing here. So we need to correct that and obviously, you know, make that actually much closer than what we need, because that's just way too far off from the reality of the camera. So go ahead and delete all the tracking points. And instead of doing normal motion, what we're going to do is go ahead and select gentle motion. And we'll go ahead and hit auto again. And we'll go through and retrack and then do a new solve again. And you'll see when it's done that it's actually going to have something that's much, much closer than what we need. Now, while the camera is not oriented correctly, our world is not oriented correctly, it's much closer to what, you know, the reality of this happening in the camera move. But the only weird thing is, if you look at this curved path of the camera, that's going to provide us a clue to something that we need to do to the scene. And also look at the trackers here in the back. They're kind of drifting around and shifting around and so forth. They're not staying locked to the scene back in the back. So something's up. And if you take a look at the scene, you can really start to understand why they're drifting and not staying locked in place. We've got some, you know, crossing roads and parallel lines and perpendicular lines in the scene of the roads. And you can see that actually, take a look at it, you can see this curvature actually on these lines here along the edge. It's kind of warped and bends because of the lens distortion, which is natural, of course, in just about every shot. And you can also see that kind of going off into the back. But this is a really cool feature of SynthEyes. You can do it automatically in some cases if you have enough good tracking points that are near the ground plane. We'll just select the lens distortion panel here and go ahead and click on Calculate Distortion. And then we'll go ahead and back here and hit go again. You don't need to retrack it. This will just fine tune, do the resolve optimization on it. And it's taking a little bit longer this time because it's actually now calculating lens distortion and correcting for that. So the calculations are a bit more computational intensive than they were the first time. So it's natural that it's going to take a little bit long. And there you can see when it's done. Check out the line. It's just much straighter. We don't have that curved line. And then also, go ahead and bring this up a little bit and we'll kind of scroll through the scene. You can see that our trackers here, those ones kind of in the background, are actually not drifting right now. They're much more locked in place, excuse me. And in the lens panel, you can see the distortion that's been applied to it, and it automatically detected the curvature of the lens and in the imagery, and then it definitely applied it to the shots. So it's a really nice feature, and our track is actually much better. So the next step that we're going to do is to go ahead and orient the world with the actual imagery. And it's going to be a lot easier for us to do this because the lines are actually now been corrected for. So let's go ahead, and we saw this last time. We're going to go ahead and add a line. And again, you got to love roads and cityscapes because you have parallel and perpendicular lines. And you can see as we add this line, it's straight and actually matches the image here. So we'll take this, and it really matches the road already. We don't have to kind of do what we did last time, which is figure out the distortion manually. So we're going to go ahead and say this is on the x-axis, and then of course, hey, we've got a y-axis here. We'll go ahead and draw on the y-axis. Again, we've got a nice long distance for that, and select that it's going to be on the y-axis. And then similar to last week, we've got another nice road parallel line to the y-axis, and we'll say it's parallel to the y-axis. Now in this scene, we don't really have something that's applicable for the x-axis in this case, but that's okay. We're going to be able to get away with doing this. So go ahead and hit align to get our world coordinates set up and align our calculation. You can look that we have actually aligned it. Switch ahead to our perspective view and lock it to the current camera. You can see that the ground plane is really nicely well aligned to the shot. But if you come over here on the left, you can see actually that we're kind of flipped upside down. All we need to do is select the line to correct that, and then go ahead and swap direction and then align. And now it's oriented correctly with everything up, except for our ground points, which are really far from the ground, but at least our camera is aligned correctly. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and do our normal thing. Select camera, lock it in whole, come down here, and you can move this down so we have our points more closely resting on the ground plane. You can kind of see what's happening there. The camera movement, it's moving parallel to the ground as well. And we can check this as we've done in the past by adding our box, which is a really good thing to add here in this kind of grid-like scene that we've got. In our perspective view, it even adds a nice little shadow for us. So we'll put it here. And then if you bring it along, you can actually take a look at it. And it's close, but it is drifting a bit. It's not exactly on the ground where we need it to be. So that's something that we need to correct for. And previously we would have ended the class, but we're going to start kind of to define that a little bit better in this class. It's just our general track, everything looks fine. It's just we need to now finesse the position of the ground. And this shot was actually relatively simple to solve at a base level here in SynthEyes, and it actually gave Victor quite a few problems in some other applications where he tried to track it. And especially in combination with this idea of the auto lens distortion correction, it was really nice. And again, if you have enough ground points on the ground plane, good tracks, it's going to do it well for you. And again, it's a really nice feature. It doesn't work all the time, but when it does, it's a beautiful thing. So that was one way to orient our scene. Obviously do it manually. We've done that a lot in our previous classes, but those of you who've used other tracking applications know that there are lots of different ways of orienting your coordinate system. and matching it up with your shot. We have a lot of different approaches that we can do. If you look at our points, you can see that some of them are a little higher here on the right, and then some on the look like they're actually on the ground over here on the left side. But the point is that this probably isn't very perfect. The other thing is we don't know what these points are in that. Like it might be a point on the top of a building, or say maybe on a tree, maybe on a shorter building, or some other feature of the building that's not actually, locked right on the ground. So there could be any number of things that might go wrong within the scene and allow us to define the ground. And just kind of moving the scene semi-arbitrarily isn't really the best way of approaching things and getting things lined up. So we're going to take a look now at how we can get a better alignment. So what we're going to do is go ahead and let's just delete this box now so that we can see more of our scene. So now what we're going to do is start defining where the ground plane is and how our coordinate system is set up within our scene. So the first thing we want to do is find a point that can serve as an origin. And this point right here is fantastic because it's actually at the corner of a street, which is good. We see perpendicular lines. So what we'll do is you can go ahead and select that point. And then we'll go ahead and set this point to be the origin. In other words, our 0, 0, 0 point, the center of our world, so to speak, where we can see our constrained points that we have and how we're going to start defining the points. We have our perspective view, which is locked to the current camera. And we'll go ahead and come back here, and we'll go ahead and say refine and say go. And now you can see that this automatically has aligned the coordinate system to our origin, to the center point that we had defined just a second ago. So now we've got kind of the center of the world defined, but we don't necessarily know that our ground plane, our grid, is in the correct place vertically, or so the rest actually on the ground plane. So we'll select a point on the ground. Actually, we could, if you wanted to, you could actually, select a ton of different points without being really consistent or being, really precise about it. And then you'd end up actually with an average of them that would end up being on the ground plane. But so what we're going to do is actually pick specific points that we know are on the floor. So we selected that point, say, okay, we're on the floor, and you can see this point here, also on the floor. In other words, Z is equal to 0. Basically, we're just going to find as many points as we can that are resting on the floor. Select that one there. And again, a wider variety of points that we know are there is going to work better for us in getting our coordinate system defined. That one's probably there. And then again, just search around. Again, you want to know that it really is resting on the ground. That's a good one. Because just by selecting a few of these, you'll get a much better result by selecting a ton that you don't know are actually on the ground. This is going to really help to solve. Again, the idea is select as many as you can, take the time to select as many as you can, and you'll end up getting better results. So now we've got about 6 points here, and we'll go ahead and we've got refine still, and we'll click OK. You can see it adjusted it slightly for us. Go ahead and click OK. Let's go ahead and switch up to our quad view so that we can see the side, and you can see that we're a little better here. Notice we're a little better. Now we've got some points that are actually shown a little bit as below the ground. This is a little bit of the error, but again, we've got a little better distribution. It's kind of teeter-tottered it in a way here, so that it's brought the points over on the right side a little bit closer to the ground plane. So now let's go ahead and add an object. We'll go ahead and draw a box. Here's 0. We'll draw it. And you'll see that once we get that put into the scene, that it's going to be it's going to remain much better locked to the scene than what we had in the previous attempt. As you refine and get things better and better, it makes more sense that any 3D object or whatever you put in the scene is actually going to obviously be more locked to the scene. Let's go ahead and move it here, so we can see it when the camera tilts down, which will help us because that's kind of the most dramatic part of our move, and will actually show us the most errors. And go ahead and play through it. You can see it as we tilt down. That's actually looking a lot better than what we had on our previous attempt. Again, taking a look at it, having in one of the harder parts of the scene as opposed to off in the distance, you're going to see more error here as well. We'll put another shape here that's a little bit further away. We'll draw it. There, draw it up higher. Giant water tower. You can see that this part of the scene also looks really locked and looks nice as well. It's looking good. It's saving pretty nicely and locked, and there's no real drifting that we're seeing within the scene. So you can see that just by selecting a few manual points that we know are on the ground, we're able to really quickly and effectively get our coordinate system aligned better, so that if we're placing objects and 3D objects within the scene, we know that they're going to be locked to where they need to be. You can always go ahead and start adding points if you don't have enough to select, and maybe add some manual trackers as well that might not be visible in our initial scene. Hit refine, come back, maybe add some more manual trackers if you want, hit refine. Again, the idea is working from a large difference and then working back down and getting a better and better resolution of our track. Now, the thing we did, if you remember here, that we started worrying about lens distortion, and we're setting something out, this camera. So if you were to export a camera move here, and you did a 3D, generate some 3D elements in a scene, we'd actually need to come back and actually take those 3D elements and then pass them through processing here in Synthesize to actually add the lens distortion back in, at which point then you could then composite it in the lens distorted or your original composite scene. And we're going to be looking at that in a future Synthesize class. We're going to take a look at an entire workflow, probably using this scene, where we come in and track, prec for composite, worry about lens distortion, get some elements generated in 3D, add lens distortion to the elements, and then integrate them back into the scene. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this class. If you have any questions, be sure to drop by the forums and ask Victor or myself. He's really enjoying doing the class, as am I. I actually used Synthesize the other day for a couple scenes in a Flames session that I did, and a shot that I couldn't get nailed in the Flames tracker, so it's really great actually to be doing Synthesize class here at PhD along with you guys. So until next week, I'm John Montgomery, serving as the voice of Victor, because of course this is Victor's class. We'll see you online in the forums.